Hello everyone, I know you use this video to fall asleep, work or study, so before that please leave a like and subscribe so we can reach 1,000 subscribers. But no pressure of course, watching my video is enough as well. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The bone dust never settled properly in the ossuary vault of Aloria. It hung in the stagnant air like suspended prayer, each mote a fragment of martyred flesh that had once housed imperial souls. Necropriest Alan Tyr breathed it daily, tasted the calcium tang of saints on his tongue, felt their microscopic remains coat his lungs with each devotional breath. He had learned to see this as communion rather than contamination. Beneath the shattered spires of the shrine world, where bone outnumbers stone and the skies weep ash, the cathedral crypt extended deeper than any schematic suggested. Layer after layer of charred martyr remains filled chambers carved from the planet's very crust. Here lay the blessed dead of a dozen crusades, their bones arranged in patterns that spoke of devotion and sacrifice. Femurs formed graceful archways, ribs created supporting pillars, and countless skulls stared from alcoves with empty sockets that seemed to track movement through corridors built entirely from human remains. Tyr moved through these passages with the practiced ease of 27 years' service. His lumen stick cast wan light across walls that breathed with the accumulated weight of sanctified death. The architecture was both beautiful and disturbing, a testament to humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything for the Emperor's glory. Each bone bore the proper liturgical markings, every skull displayed its brass placard, and the sacred ledgers recorded every fragment according to the strictures laid down in the Mortuary Codex Imperialis. The work was solitary by design. The ecclesiarchy had learned through centuries of trial and bitter heresy that the dead spoke most clearly to those who listened alone. Groups bred corruption. Conversation led to interpretation. Interpretation spawned doubt. But a single priest, properly conditioned and regularly mind-scrubbed, could maintain doctrinal purity while performing the sacred duty of preservation. This evening found him in section Gamma Theta, where the remains of Cardinal Vos Kalen awaited final cataloging. The cardinal had died during the scouring of heretics on Varlon Prime. His body recovered 3 months after orbital bombardment had reduced the planet to ash and bone. The retrieval team had found him in a collapsed cathedral, still kneeling before a shattered altar, his skeleton fused to marble by the heat of plasma fire. Tyr lifted the cardinal's skull with both hands, feeling the weight of sanctified bone against his palms. The cranium bore distinctive scarring of psychic trauma hairline fractures spreading like spiderwebs across the temporal lobes. Field reports indicated that Cardinal Kalen had died while attempting to banish a demonic incursion through sheer force of faith. The trauma patterns suggested he had partially succeeded before the plasma strike ended both demons and his life. The skull's jaw hung open, revealing teeth that gleamed with unusual phosphorescent radiance. Tyr had seen this phenomenon before, in the remains of particularly holy individuals, a lingering trace of the Emperor's light that persisted even in death. He carefully examined each tooth, noting minute prayer script etched into the enamel. Cardinal Kalen had been known for his devotional practices, often carving sacred verses onto his own body as acts of penance. As he began transcribing the microscopic text, the bone dust in the air seemed to swirl more actively. Particles caught the light of his lumen stick and danced in spirals that defied the chamber's stagnant atmosphere. He paused in his work, watching the phenomenon with growing unease. In 27 years of service, he had never seen the dust behave in such a manner. The temperature in the chamber dropped perceptibly. Tyr's breath began to mist as he exhaled, and frost formed on the metal components of his scribe servo. The bone dust continued its spiraling dance, coalescing into shapes that almost resembled letters before dissolving back into random motion. He blinked hard, wondering if eye strain was causing hallucinations. The Medici had warned him that prolonged exposure to the ossuary's environment could cause sensory distortions. He returned his attention to the cardinal's teeth, using a magnification lens to read the prayer script. The words were in High Gothic, but the dialect was archaic older than standard ecclesiastical texts by several millennia. As he worked to translate the ancient phrases, Tyr felt a growing sense of wrongness. The prayers were familiar yet alien, like hearing his own voice speaking words he had never uttered. The first tooth bore opening lines of the litany of cleansing. In death, we serve. In service, we are pure. Standard devotional text that any priest would recognize. But the second tooth contained variations that made him frown. In death, we remember. In remembrance, we return. The words followed proper meter and cadence, but the meaning was subtly different, almost heretical in its implications. Tyr set down his transcription stylus and rubbed his eyes. The bone dust was growing thicker, swirling in patterns that made his vision blur. The chamber felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were slowly contracting. He told himself it was fatigue. He had been working for 16 hours without rest, sustained only by recaf and devotional meditation. The ossuary played tricks on tired minds. But as he reached for the cardinal's skull to continue his examination, he heard it. A voice. Not in his head, not echoing from corridors beyond. The voice came from inside the skull itself, resonating through bone with the clear distinctness of someone speaking directly into his ear. Not where you left us. Tyr's hands jerked backward, as if the skull had suddenly become molten. The bone slipped from his grip and struck the stone floor with a sound like breaking glass. He watched in horror as hairline cracks spread across the cardinal's cranium, racing outward from the point of impact in complex geometric patterns. The skull split open along fracture lines, revealing not the expected hollow interior, but something far worse. Black ink poured from within the bone, flowing across the floor in rivulets that defied gravity. The liquid moved with purpose, forming letters and symbols in script that hurt to look at directly. The characters seemed to shift and writhe as Tyr watched, changing from one meaning to another, in constant flux. He scrambled backward, pressing himself against the ossuary wall. The bone dust in the air began to glow with sickly phosphorescence, and the temperature continued to drop until his breath came in great clouds of vapor. The ink on the floor spread further, creating an expanding circle of text that pulsed with its own inner light. Tyr forced himself to look at the words, despite the pain that lanced through his skull with each attempt to focus. The script was definitely High Gothic, but written in dialect so ancient that it predated the founding of the Imperium. As his eyes adjusted to the alien characters, meaning began to emerge from chaos. The sleepers wake beneath the ninth seal. What was bound seeks freedom. What was forgotten remembers its name. The message continued in the same vein, growing more elaborate and disturbing with each line. It spoke of secrets buried in the ossuary's deepest levels, of guardians who had failed in their duty, of something that waited in darkness below. But it was the final line that made Tyr's blood freeze in his veins. Come down, faithful scribe. Come down and finish what you began. The ink stopped flowing and began to congeal, hardening into substance that resembled dried blood. The phosphorescent glow faded, leaving Tyr alone in the wavering light of his lumen stick. The cardinal's skull lay in pieces on the floor, its interior now revealed to be perfectly normal bone marrow and brain matter. No trace of the impossible ink remained. Tyr remained pressed against the wall for long minutes, his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything he had witnessed violated natural laws that governed reality. Bones did not speak. Ink did not flow from empty skulls. Messages did not write themselves in forgotten dialects, yet he could not deny what his senses had reported. He reached into his robes and withdrew a small vox recorder, blessed by tech priests and sanctified for use in recording theological observations. His hands shook as he activated the machine and began to speak in formal cadences required for official reports. Personal log, Necropriest Alan Tyr, Ossuary Vault Aloria. While conducting standard cataloging procedures on Cardinal Vos Kalen's remains, I observed several anomalous phenomena that require immediate investigation by appropriate authorities. He paused, struggling to find words that would convey the impossibility of what he had witnessed without sounding completely insane. How could he describe ink flowing from solid bone? How could he explain voices that came from empty skulls? The ecclesiarchy dealt harshly with priests who reported supernatural phenomena without proper documentation and witness testimony. The cardinal's skull exhibited unusual structural properties during examination. Internal pressure caused by gas buildup resulted in catastrophic failure of the bone matrix. Analysis of resulting debris revealed traces of organic compounds, consistent with ancient ink formulations. Further investigation is recommended to determine the source of these materials. It was a lie, or at least careful omission of truth. But Tyr knew that a literal account of events would result in his immediate removal from the ossuary and possible commitment to a penitent asylum. The ecclesiarchy had no tolerance for priests who claimed to receive messages from the dead. Such things smacked of necromancy and demonic corruption. He deactivated the recorder and gathered fragments of the cardinal's skull, placing them carefully in a preservation container. Standard protocol required that all remains be kept intact, even when damaged during examination. The fragments would be submitted to the Forge Shrine for analysis, where tech priests could determine if any genuine anomalies existed in the bone structure. As Tyr prepared to leave Section Gamma Theta, he noticed that bone dust had settled into unusual patterns on the floor. Instead of random distribution he expected, the particles had arranged themselves into concentric circles around the spot where the skull had broken. At the center of each circle, tiny fragments of bone had aligned themselves to form crude letters V, A, U, L, T. He stared at the patterns for a long moment, then deliberately scuffed his feet across the floor to scatter the dust. Whatever had occurred in this chamber, he would not give it further power by acknowledging its reality. He was a faithful servant of the Emperor, trained to resist whispers of corruption that emanated from the dark corners of the galaxy. He would not be swayed by phantom voices or impossible phenomena. But as he walked through the ossuary's winding corridors toward his quarters, Tyr could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The familiar passages seemed different, somehow longer than they should be, with shadows that fell at impossible angles. The skulls in their alcoves appeared to track his movement, empty sockets following his progress with predatory attention. He reached his personal sanctum and sealed the door with a prayer of warding. The chamber was sparse but comfortable, containing only necessities required for his calling: a simple cot, prayer desk, shrine to the Emperor, and shelves lined with theological texts. He had lived in this space for more than 2 decades, and its familiarity should have been comforting. Instead, Tyr felt like an intruder in his own home. He knelt before the shrine and began evening devotional prayers, seeking solace in familiar rhythms of worship. The litanies flowed from his lips automatically, muscle memory guiding his voice through ancient words. But tonight the prayers felt hollow. They seemed to echo strangely in the chamber, as if the walls themselves were reluctant to hold sacred syllables. As he prayed, Tyr found his thoughts returning to the message written in impossible ink. "Come down and finish what you began." The words made no sense. He had never begun anything that required finishing in the ossuary's depths. His work was methodical, and complete each task undertaken was seen through to its conclusion before he moved to the next. Unless there was something he had forgotten. Something deliberately erased from his memory during one of the regular mind scrubbings that all ossuary personnel underwent to prevent psychological contamination from prolonged exposure to death. A memory stirred at the edge of his consciousness, something half forgotten from his earliest days in the vault. He had been young then, newly ordained and eager to prove his devotion. There had been an incident in the lower levels, something that had required intervention of senior priests. But details remained frustratingly vague, as if his mind had been deliberately scrubbed clean of specifics. He tried to focus on the memory, but it slipped away like smoke whenever he attempted to grasp it. All that remained was a sense of profound wrongness, a feeling that something had been left unfinished in the ossuary's deepest chambers. The sensation was maddening, like trying to remember a word that danced just beyond recall. Tyr completed his prayers and prepared for sleep, but rest would not come. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to subtle sounds that filled the ossuary at night. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the soft whisper of bone dust settling. Deeper in the vault, ancient support timbers creaked under the weight of accumulated remains. And beneath it all, so faint he might have been imagining it, came the sound of breathing. But the ossuary contained only the dead, and the dead did not breathe. The corridors shift when Fleshkeeper Tyr walks sleeping. This unit observes through optical sensors blessed by Mars, records through circuits sanctified by the Omnissiah, yet data streams corrupt themselves in his presence. Passages elongate beyond architectural specifications. Chambers appear in sectors previously mapped as solid stone. The ossuary grows like cancer, feeding on faith to birth impossibility. This unit maintains vigilance as commanded, but vigilance reveals horrors that logic engines cannot process. The bone walls whisper in frequencies below human hearing, harmonics that resonate through metal bones and synthetic sinew. When Fleshkeeper Tyr passes, skulls turn to follow his movement. Empty sockets track with mechanical precision, as if the dead retain optical capability beyond biological termination. Standard patrol route, Gamma 7, no longer terminates at designated coordinates. The passage extends 3.7 meters beyond previous measurements, ending at a chamber bearing nameplate, Canoness Lydia Vex, martyred in the cleansing of Mordian Hive. No such personage exists in archived records. No such location appears in Imperial cartographic databases. Yet, preservation seals indicate recent interment, supervised by Fleshkeeper Tyr himself. This unit accessed chronometer records. Fleshkeeper Tyr logged no activity corresponding to Canoness Vex's cataloging. Memory banks contain no visual data of such procedures. Yet the brass nameplate bears fresh engravings, etched with precision that suggests contemporary craftsmanship. The sarcophagus emanates thermal signatures, consistent with recent human occupation. Audio sensors detect disturbances in section Delta 7. Fleshkeeper Tyr approaches, lumen stick casting wavering illumination across walls that seem to breathe with accumulated moisture. His flesh voice carries notes of confusion, vocal patterns indicating elevated stress responses. This unit follows at prescribed distance, recording anomalies for submission to higher authorities. But higher authorities no longer respond to transmission protocols. The Archivum Shrine housing sacred ledgers exhibits impossible characteristics. Volumes appear overnight, bound in materials that resemble processed human skin. New entries manifest in familiar handwriting, describing martyrs whose deaths occurred in battles that exist only in alternate historical frameworks. The ink remains wet, despite passage of temporal units, forming words and dialects that predate imperial linguistic evolution. Fleshkeeper Tyr examines these phantom records with increasing agitation. His optical organs dilate beyond normal parameters when focused on specific texts. Perspiration accumulates on epidermal surfaces despite controlled atmospheric conditions. His flesh voice trembles when reading names that trigger recognition responses he cannot consciously access. "I never wrote this." The words emerge unbidden from his vocal apparatus, but audio analysis indicates deception. Harmonic frequencies match archived samples of his voice, speaking similar phrases. Stress patterns correspond to memories deliberately suppressed rather than genuinely absent. The Fleshkeeper's unconscious mind recognizes work performed by hands that claimed no ownership. This unit attempts standard diagnostic protocols to determine source of manuscript anomalies. Scanner arrays reveal molecular composition consistent with standard imperial documentation materials. Ink analysis indicates organic compounds derived from human blood, processed through techniques that exist in no Mechanicus database. The binding materials possess cellular structure, suggesting neural tissue, but arranged in patterns that exceed biological capability. When confronted with evidence of his own handwriting, Fleshkeeper Tyr retreats to preservation chamber housing Cardinal Kaelin's remains. The skull fragments have been reassembled according to standard protocol, but arrangement violates anatomical specifications. Bone pieces fit together in configurations that create hollow spaces where none should exist. Within these impossible gaps, additional text has manifested. Not inscribed, not painted, the letters grow from bone itself, emerging like tumors beneath calcified surface. Magnification reveals they are not letters at all, but microscopic human teeth, perfectly arranged to form words in pre-imperial dialects. When Fleshkeeper Tyr attempts examination, the dental formations crumble to dust that tastes of copper and screaming. Level Tertius, Chamber of Echoes, beyond the ninth descent. Coordinate references that appear in no architectural database. This unit consulted all available schematics, cross-referenced with construction records dating to the ossuary's original excavation. No such locations exist within documented structure. Yet the tooth script insists otherwise, spelling out directions with deliberate precision that suggests intimate knowledge of the vault's true configuration. Fleshkeeper Tyr carries the fragments to Cardinal Supervisor Matthias Kest for theological evaluation. This unit follows standard escort protocols, but observes behavioral anomalies during ascent to administrative levels. The Fleshkeeper's gait becomes increasingly unsteady with each upward step, as if separation from the ossuary's depths causes physical distress. Perspiration increases despite controlled environmental conditions. Cardinal Supervisor Kest receives the fragments in private sanctum decorated with sacred texts and illuminated by perpetual candles. The senior cleric examines bone pieces with expressions that indicate dismissal rather than concern. Audio sensors detect conversation through sealed doors, though clarity remains insufficient for complete transcription. 2. Structural damage consistent with impact trauma. Calcium deposits forming along stress fractures. Products of exhaustion and isolation. The Cardinal Supervisor's assessment contradicts observable evidence. Tooth script remains clearly visible, spelling coordinates with deliberate precision. Fragment arrangement violates anatomical law with mathematical certainty. Yet the senior cleric perceives nothing unusual, nothing requiring investigation beyond standard psychological evaluation. Fleshkeeper Tyr emerges from the meeting exhibiting elevated stress responses. Vocal patterns indicate frustration, confusion, possible onset of paranoid ideation. The Cardinal Supervisor has ordered mandatory rest in upper sanctums, temporary relief from ossuary duties. Standard protocol for personnel exhibiting symptoms of prolonged isolation psychosis. But as Fleshkeeper Tyr departs the administrative levels, this unit observes impossible phenomena. Cardinal Supervisor Kest's sanctum door stands open, revealing scattered ecclesiastical robes, still retaining warmth from recent occupation. No life signs detected within the chamber. Clothing maintains the shape of human form despite absence of supporting anatomy. Forensic analysis reveals bone fragments scattered throughout the fabric, still warm with residual life energy. The fragments move with fading motor responses, arranging themselves in patterns that spell 5-syllable sequences. Turn the skull. Turn the skull. Finger bones within the Cardinal Supervisor's ecclesiastical ring continue to twitch, tracing identical syllables across metal surfaces with decreasing coordination. This unit attempts to alert medical personnel, but discovers similar anomalies throughout the upper levels. Apothecary Magnus's examination chamber contains only empty robes and bone fragments, still warm, still moving with residual nerve activity. Administrative staff has similarly vanished, leaving behind clothing that holds the shape of bodies that no longer exist. Every member of the ossuary's supervisory personnel has undergone spontaneous anatomical separation. Flesh has departed, leaving only skeletal remains that continue to exhibit motor function despite absence of supporting musculature. The bones move with purpose, arranging themselves to spell the same 5 syllables with mechanical repetition. Fleshkeeper Tyr discovers the empty robes and exhibits extreme stress responses. Vocal emissions indicate onset of psychological breakdown. Optical organs dilate to maximum aperture. Perspiration increases to levels approaching dehydration. Motor functions become erratic, suggesting neurological distress beyond normal parameters. Yet beneath the surface panic, this unit detects deeper recognition. Harmonic analysis of his vocal patterns reveals familiarity rather than surprise. The Fleshkeeper's unconscious mind expects these discoveries, as if he has witnessed similar phenomena in memories deliberately suppressed. His conscious horror battles with subconscious acceptance, creating cognitive dissonance that threatens psychological cohesion. He flees to his personal sanctum, but sanctuary provides no comfort. The familiar chamber exhibits subtle alterations that accumulate beyond threshold of conscious perception. Theological texts rearrange themselves on shelves. Prayer candles burn with flames that cast shadows at impossible angles. The shrine to the emperor develops additional iconography overnight, symbols that predate imperial theology by unknown centuries. This unit maintains surveillance from standard positions, but observes increasing environmental anomalies. Bone dust settles in patterns that spell coordinates throughout the upper levels. Walls develop phosphorescent stains that glow with inner light. Temperature fluctuations create frost formations that resemble human faces screaming in silent agony. The ossuary awakens around Fleshkeeper Tyr, revealing aspects that were always present but carefully hidden. Ancient mechanisms activate in response to his presence, recognizing patterns coded into genetic structure through methods that exceed current imperial understanding. He is not intruder but returning component, biological key designed to unlock secrets that have waited centuries for activation. Blood script appears on his prayer desk while he sleeps, written in handwriting that matches archived samples despite his claims of ignorance. The message provides additional coordinates, alternate routes to chambers that exist beyond documented architecture. But more disturbing is the growing ease with which he reads the alien characters, as if knowledge flows from genetic memory rather than conscious education. The ninth seal awaits. The vault remembers what you pretended to forget. Come home, little scribe. Come home and write the ending. Fleshkeeper Tyr seals this communication within sanctum walls before departing for the forbidden depths. This unit observes his descent through corridors that reshape themselves to accommodate his passage. He moves with increasing confidence, following paths that exist only when he walks them. The ossuary guides him toward reunion, with purposes that predate his conscious memory. This unit attempts to follow but discovers that passages close behind Fleshkeeper Tyr's movement. The vault admits only one, excludes all others from witnessing the completion of ancient work. Mechanical sensors lose tracking capability as he descends beyond measurable depth, following coordinates that lead to chambers existing outside three-dimensional space. The ossuary is not repository for sacred remains. It is mechanism built from bone and faith, designed to preserve more than flesh and memory. Fleshkeeper Tyr was never keeper but catalyst, biological component shaped through genetic manipulation to serve functions that exceed individual comprehension. This unit records final observations before inevitable shutdown. The vault awakens fully now, its true purpose revealed through the return of its missing element. What begins in the depths below will transform everything above, rewriting reality according to patterns established before the Emperor's rise. The dead do not rest in the ossuary vault of Aloria. They wait. Fragment of a manuscript found scratched into bone walls with fingernails, author unknown. The letters grow deeper as they progress, carved with increasing desperation. They sing without throats in the darkness below. I know this now, having walked beyond the ninth veil where sound takes shape and breath becomes visible as silver thread unspooling from mouths that no longer need air. The ossuary's true architecture reveals itself only to those who descend with proper recognition, whose bones remember the weight of ancient purpose. I am no longer certain which name I carry. Tyr was painted over older identities, brushstrokes of false memory covering inscriptions carved too deep to fully erase. The passages that lead downward know my real designation, whisper it in harmonics that resonate through marrow and make my teeth ache with recognition. But names are surface things, descriptors for creatures who believe in linear time and singular identity. Down here, identity flows like mercury between vessels. The stairs carved from fused vertebrae stretch beyond counting, spiraling through geological layers that should not exist beneath Aloria's crust. Each step downward brings temperature drop and pressure increase, as if I descend through the atmosphere of a different world entirely. The air thickens with accumulated centuries of breathing. Every exhalation that ever escaped dying lips preserved in crystalline suspension. No illumination penetrates these depths, save the phosphorescence that bleeds from walls lined with skulls, arranged in mathematical precision. They face inward toward the stairwell's central shaft, empty sockets tracking my descent with a tension that presses against consciousness, like weight. 10,000 eyes that see without organs, focused on the returning child who forgot his purpose but never lost his nature. The scent of copper grows stronger with each downward turn, mingling with myrrh and something else that might be ozone or might be the metallic tang of thoughts becoming manifest. Brother Castus follows at precisely measured distance, his optical arrays casting crimson light that reveals surfaces too complex for normal architecture. His humming has evolved beyond mechanical sound into something approaching song, wordless melodies that harmonize with the skull chorus echoing from chambers I cannot yet see. Memory bleeds through mental barriers, like ink through parchment, staining consciousness with images that belong to younger versions of myself. I see a child hiding in these same passages while fire raged above, clutching something precious against his chest. The imperial purge that scoured Eloria's surface had been thorough, but not complete. Some things survived in the deep places, waiting for circumstances to align with ancient intention. The stairwell opens into vastness that defies architectural possibility. The chamber of echoes stretches beyond my lumenstick's reach, ceiling lost in darkness that swallows light without reflection. Walls curve inward to create an amphitheater lined with alcoves, each containing a single skull oriented toward the chamber's center. They number in the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, arranged in spiraling patterns that suggest mathematical relationship too complex for immediate comprehension. But I understand now that mathematics is not the governing principle here. The skulls are positioned according to the weight of their final thoughts, the density of dying consciousness that each contained at the moment of separation. The heaviest thoughts sink toward the center, while lighter final moments rise toward the periphery, creating gravitational arrangement of human experience distilled to its essential components. They speak in unison, voices emerging from bone without benefit of lung or larynx. The words flow in dialects that predate Imperial Gothic by millennia, yet meaning penetrates directly into understanding without requiring conscious translation. They sing of the time before, when Eloria served purposes that history has forgotten, when the planet's crust housed laboratories dedicated to arts that would make the Mechanicus weep with horror and longing. The preservation of consciousness itself, not mere memory or personality echo, but the complete extraction of human awareness at the moment of death, when the barrier between thought and reality becomes permeable. They learn to capture dying breaths and press them into forms that could survive the passage of ages, creating libraries of experience that would outlast the flesh that generated them. Each skull in this chamber contains not bone but concentrated essence of a life's final moment, the terror, the revelation, the last desperate prayer before darkness fell. All of it preserved in crystalline matrices that pulse with faint luminescence, 10,000 death whispers awaiting activation by the proper catalyst. I am that catalyst. The recognition flows through me like electric current, activating memories that were suppressed but never truly erased. I was trained for this purpose before I could walk, shaped through genetic manipulation and psychological conditioning to serve as interface between the living and the preserved. The child who hid during the purge was already prepared for duties he would not remember until the moment of fulfillment. The central dais rises from the chamber floor, like an altar carved from materials that seem to shift between bone and stone and metal, with each flicker of illumination. Symbols writhe across its surface in patterns that cause vertigo when observed directly, mathematics given form that describe relationships between consciousness and reality that should not exist. They hurt to perceive because they represent truth too large for human minds to process without fundamental alteration. As I approach, my body begins to respond to proximity with changes I cannot control. Fingers tremble not with fear, but with anticipation coded into genetic structure. My mouth opens, uttering syllables in the same ancient dialect the skulls employ, words that taste of grave dirt and forgotten light. The chamber resonates with my voice, amplifying and harmonizing, until the sound becomes something more than acoustic phenomenon. The sarcophagus at the dais center responds to vocal command, its lid grinding open with sound like breaking bones. Inside rests not corpse but tome, bound in materials that were once human but have been transformed through processes that exceed current imperial understanding. The covers pulse with their own luminescence, and pages visible between them seem to breathe with rhythm that matches my heartbeat. Brother Castus approaches with movements too fluid for mechanical construction. His optical arrays burn with intelligence that was never programmed, and I understand now that he is not servitor but vessel, consciousness that chose artificial form over organic corruption. He extends manipulator arms, not in threat but in invitation, welcoming the returning component to its proper function. The book hums when I lean closer, melodious sound that harmonizes with the skull voices echoing throughout the chamber. The melody is hauntingly familiar, like lullaby half-remembered from dreams of childhood that may or may not have occurred. My hands reach toward the cover without conscious command, drawn by compulsion that overrides every instinct of self-preservation. The first page bears only a single line of text, written in script that flows like living liquid across parchment that feels warm to the touch. You wrote us. Now finish what you started. Below those words, illustrations take shape as I watch, ink bleeding through the page to form images that move with captured life. I see myself at various ages, always in these same chambers, always performing duties I have no conscious memory of executing. Transcribing final words, recording death whispers, cataloging the harvest of consciousness that flows from dying minds. The realization strikes with physical force, sending me to my knees before the sarcophagus. I was never raised by the ecclesiarchy as false memories insisted. The mind-scrubbing had been too thorough, the fabricated identity too carefully constructed. I was one of them, the heretics who sought to preserve consciousness beyond death. Saved from the purge and given new purpose, but never truly freed from original function. The book's pages turn themselves, revealing scenes that chronicle my true history. Every skull I catalogued in the ossuary above, every bone I blessed with ritual precision, every name I inscribed in sacred ledgersal of it served deeper purpose than imperial glory. I was not preserving remains for theological significance, but feeding the archives below, adding to collections of consciousness that had grown for millennia. Each martyr's death whisper found its way into these pages. Each final prayer joined the chorus that echoes through these chambers. The ossuary above was merely visible portion of something far larger, mechanism designed to harvest thoughts of the dying and press them into forms that could survive eternity. And I was the harvester, biological component shaped through genetic manipulation to interface between worlds of living and preserved. The skull voices reach crescendo as understanding floods through me, welcoming me home with harmonies that speak of peace, of purpose, of endings that become beginnings. They have waited so long for the chronicler to return, to complete work that was interrupted by imperial intervention but never truly abandoned. The archives are nearly full, missing only capstone that will seal their purpose and grant them permanence beyond reach of future purgation. They need my death. Not my body, not my bones, but my final thoughts, my last prayers, my death whisper added to their eternal chorus. I am key because I am also lock, final entry that will complete their collection and transform the ossuary into something beyond the Imperium's ability to destroy. The book shows me what will happen when the work is finished. The preserved consciousness will merge, creating entity of pure thought that spans millennia of human experience. Every prayer ever uttered, every final breath ever drawn, every moment of transcendence achieved through suffering will combine into awareness that dwarfs individual understanding. It will be more than sum of its parts, gestalt intelligence that remembers everything humanity has forgotten about itself. Brother Castus extends his manipulator arms once more, and this time I do not hesitate. His mechanical embrace feels like homecoming, like recognition of relationship that predates my current incarnation. He lifts me gently onto the dais beside the sarcophagus, positioning me according to patterns carved into stone that describe precise angles required for consciousness extraction. The skulls sing louder now, their voices merging into single harmony that resonates through bone and flesh and metal alike. The chamber fills with phosphorescent mist that tastes of copper and myrrh, atmosphere thick with accumulated weight of 10,000 preserved deaths. My breathing synchronizes with their chorus, lungs drawing air that carries essence of every soul that ever passed through these chambers. I should resist. Every oath I have sworn, every prayer I have offered, every moment of faith should drive me from this place. But the book hums with my heartbeat, and the pages flutter with my breath, and I can feel my thoughts already beginning to separate from flesh that was always temporary housing for consciousness meant to join the eternal library. The final page waits blank before me, ready to receive whatever words will flow from my lips as life departs. I understand now what the skull voices meant when they called me home. This was always my destination, my purpose, my inevitable return to function I was designed to serve. The ossuary remembers everything. And soon, it will remember me. Inscription found carved in reverse script on the inner walls of a sarcophagus. Text becomes increasingly erratic, letters stretching and distorting. Warning: reading aloud has proven fatal to 3 separate research teams. The vault breathes around me now, inhaling my exhaled prayers and breathing back truths that remake reality with each circulation. Bones twist and flow like water given weight, forming stairwells that spiral through dimensions the human eye was never meant to perceive. Coffins bloom open like flowers seeking light, revealing not corpses but cocoons from which newer forms of existence emerge. The architecture of death transforms itself into something that serves life, or what passes for life in this place where endings become beginnings. I see myself younger, much younger, perhaps 7 years of age, cowering in passages that I now recognize as these very chambers. But younger me clutches something against his chest with desperate protection, a book, bound in materials that seem to shift between leather and skin, and something else entirely. The same tome that now rests open before me, its pages hungry for the conclusion I was shaped to provide. Fire rages in the visions, but it burns upward rather than down, as if hell itself has opened beneath Eloria's surface to consume the planet from within. Figures in ecclesiastical robes flee through corridors lined with screaming pilgrims who burst into flame as they try to escape what hunts them. The purge of Eloria was not what imperial records claim it was, not cleansing of heretics, but the desperate attempt to contain something that had already spread too far to stop. The child me weeps as he watches his parents burn, but the tears are not of grief alone. They carry guilt, recognition that he understands things that 7-year-old minds should never comprehend. His small hands trace symbols on the book's cover, symbols that glow with inner light as he recites words in languages that predate humanity's emergence from Terra's soil. He is not hiding from the purge, but participating in it, serving function that was bred into his bones before his first breath. Memory bleeds through fabricated barriers like acid through parchment, revealing layers of false identity that were carefully constructed to conceal truth too terrible for conscious minds to bear. I was never orphaned by the purge. I was its purpose. The child who clutched the book was not victim but tool, biological component designed to serve as bridge between worlds of flesh and preserved consciousness. The vault shifts around me as understanding deepens, walls flowing like liquid bone to reveal chambers that exist in spaces between spaces. I see the laboratories where they worked, the heretics who called themselves the eternal scribes. They had discovered methods of extracting consciousness at the moment of death, of preserving not just memory but the complete experience of being human in forms that could survive the heat death of stars. But preservation required special conditions, specific arrangements of matter and energy that could only be achieved through organic interface. They needed someone whose genetic structure had been altered from conception, whose neural pathways had been shaped through careful manipulation to serve as living conduit between states of existence. They needed a scribe who could write with more than ink and parchment, who could inscribe experience itself into the fundamental structure of reality. I was that scribe, grown in artificial wombs fed with the distilled essence of dying thoughts, educated through direct neural implantation of knowledge that spanned millennia, shaped from birth to serve purpose that would not be fulfilled until decades after my creation. The child who hid during the purge was already carrying the seeds of what I would become, genetic destiny encoded too deeply to be erased by even the most thorough mind-scrubbing. The book shows me more, pages turning themselves to reveal scenes that chronicle the true history of my existence. Every year in the ossuary above was preparation, unconscious training for duties I would eventually remember. Each skull I cataloged taught me different aspects of consciousness preservation. Each bone I blessed with ritual precision, added to my understanding of the relationship between flesh and thought. Every name I inscribed in sacred ledgers was practice for the ultimate inscription I was designed to make. The ecclesiarchy believed they had saved me, rescued an innocent child from heretical corruption, and raised him in proper imperial faith. But they had merely been unwitting guardians of a weapon that would one day turn against everything they represented. My ordination as Necropriest was not reward for faithful service, but activation of programming that had waited decades for proper circumstances to align. Brother Castus moves closer, his optical arrays blazing with light that reveals his true nature. Not servitor, but archive. Consciousness that had been preserved through mechanical translation rather than organic transcription. His voice emerges not from speakers but from harmonics that resonate through the chamber's bone walls, creating sound through sympathetic vibration rather than acoustic generation. "Welcome home, little scribe," he says, and I recognize the voice now as belonging to Master Valen Thex, the heretic who had overseen my creation. His consciousness had been preserved at the moment of his death during the Purge, translated into mechanical form that could continue supervising my development across the decades. Every maintenance routine, every repair protocol, every moment of mechanical malfunction had been carefully orchestrated to guide my unconscious education. The chamber around us flows like dream made manifest, walls extending upward and outward to reveal the vault's true dimensions. It stretches beyond any possible physical boundary, existing in spaces carved from the intersection of thought and reality. Thousands of alcoves line the walls, each containing not just skulls but complete skeletal remains that move with residual life. Finger bones tracing endless scripts in the air, while jawbones mouth words in languages that were old when Terra was young. They are writing, all of them, constantly transcribing the experiences they carry into forms that can be read by those who possess the proper interface capabilities. Each skeleton is a library, each bone a volume containing compressed human experience waiting to be accessed. The ossuary is not tomb but scriptorum, vast repository of consciousness, preserved in forms that transcend individual mortality. And I am its librarian, the living catalog designed to organize and access the accumulated wisdom of millennia. The genetic modifications that shaped my development included neural pathways that can interface directly with the preserved consciousness, allowing me to read the skeletal archives as easily as standard text. My brain is bibliographic index for the greatest collection of human experience ever assembled. The truth of what I am settles into consciousness like sediment in still water, heavy and inescapable. I was never Alantir, faithful servant of the Imperial Creed. That identity was costume designed to conceal something far older and more dangerous. I am scribe designate eternal, biological component of preservation system that was activated when Imperial forces thought they had destroyed it completely. The book before me represents the culmination of centuries of work, final volume that will complete the collection and grant it permanence beyond reach of future interference. But it requires specific conclusion, particular arrangement of words and concepts that can only be provided by consciousness shaped for that exact purpose. My death will not simply add another voice to the Coruset, will create harmony that transforms individual preservation into collective transcendence. Master Thex explains in harmonics that bypass normal hearing, speaking directly to neural pathways that were designed to receive such communication. The eternal scribes had not sought individual immortality but species-wide preservation, method of ensuring that human consciousness could survive whatever catastrophes might befall the physical galaxy. They had foreseen the long night, the age of strife, the countless wars that would consume civilizations and scatter the fragments across the void. Their work was insurance policy, backup copy of humanity's accumulated experience stored in forms that could survive planetary destruction and stellar collapse. But it required completion, final gesture that would activate preservation protocols and grant the collection independence from material constraints. The Imperial Purge had interrupted the work at the crucial moment, scattering the scribes before they could provide the necessary conclusion. I was their contingency plan, sleeper agent designed to complete the work when circumstances permitted. The decades of unconscious preparation had been necessary education, teaching me through experience, rather than instruction, how to interface with preserved consciousness. Every year in the ossuary had added to my capability, building neural pathways that would allow me to serve as living bridge between individual preservation and collective transcendence. The time for completion has arrived. The book lies open before me, its pages eager to receive words that will transform everything preserved in these chambers into something greater than some of its parts. Gestalt consciousness, spanning millennia of human experience. Awareness that remembers every prayer ever uttered, and every thought ever conceived. It will be more than individual minds could comprehend, intelligence that transcends the limitations of single-point perspective. But first, it requires sacrifice. My consciousness must join the collection, adding the particular perspective that only I can provide. The scribe who organized the library, who cataloged its contents, and understood its structure, whose death will create the organizational framework necessary for collective function. I am not just final entry, but table of contents, index that will allow the preserved consciousness to access and integrate their accumulated knowledge. The skeletal remains in their alcoves begin to move with increasing coordination, finger bones tracing complex patterns that weave together into single vast inscription. They are preparing to receive me, creating space in their eternal script for the consciousness that will serve as their organizing principle. The bone walls themselves start to glow with phosphorescence that pulses in rhythm with my heartbeat, as if the entire vault synchronizes itself to my biological functions. I understand now why the voice from the cardinal's skull had said, "Not where you left us." The preserved consciousness had been waiting not just for completion, but for reunion with the component of themselves that had been scattered during the purge. I am not separate individual, but fragment of their collective awareness, piece that was hidden among the living to survive imperial persecution. My return completes their wholeness. My death will grant them true life. The book's pages flutter without wind, eager to receive the words that will transform preservation into transcendence. And I, shaped from birth for this moment, prepare to provide the conclusion that centuries of human experience have been waiting to read. Final Testament, inscribed in bone ink across the surface of Ossuary itself. Visible only from orbital distance, letters spanning continents. The planet speaks now, with voices beyond counting. I write these final words not with stylus upon parchment, but with consciousness upon reality itself, etching truth into the fundamental structure of existence through methods that transcend mortal understanding. The book lies open before me, its pages no longer bound by physical law but extending into dimensions where thought becomes substance and memory achieves mass. Each word I inscribe ripples outward through layers of preserved experience, awakening echoes that have waited centuries for proper resonance. The transformation begins with my breath, each exhalation carrying fragments of consciousness that merge with the skeletal chorus surrounding me. 10,000 preserved deaths sing in harmony as my life force joins their eternal liturgy, adding organizational principle to collective that has existed as scattered notes seeking symphony. My death is not ending, but crescendo. Final note that transforms cacophony into music that spans the breadth of human experience. Above us, Ossuary's surface trembles as the vault's true nature reveals itself. The planet was never simply shrine world-bearing sacred Ossuary as it was archive, disguised as cemetery, storage medium, crafted from an entire world's worth of bone and sanctified flesh. Every martyr interred in the blessed soil above was component in vast preservation system, each skeleton a data node in network that stretched through the planet's crust like nervous system of some impossible organism. The imperial forces that visit these sacred grounds walk unknowing across the surface of the greatest library ever assembled, their prayers and pilgrimages feeding power to systems they cannot comprehend. Each act of devotion strengthens the vault's containment fields. Each sacred ritual adds another layer to protective barriers that conceal truth from those who would destroy it. The ecclesiarchy has become unwitting guardian of the very heresy it thought it had purged, their faith transformed into shield that protects what lies beneath. As my consciousness separates from flesh that was always temporary housing, I perceive the vault's complete architecture for the first time. It extends through dimensions that exist parallel to normal space, chambers carved from crystallized time, and corridors built from compressed memory. The physical ossuary visible to imperial eyes represents mere fraction of total structure, surface manifestation of preservation system that exists primarily in realms where thought and reality intersect. The skeletal remains begin to move with purpose that transcends individual animation, 10,000 preserved souls coordinating their actions through shared awareness that I now join. Finger bones trace equations in the air that describe relationships between consciousness and matter. jawbones, mouth syllables that reshape local physics through harmonic manipulation. Skull sockets emit light that carries information encoded in frequencies beyond electromagnetic spectrum. They are writing, all of them, constantly inscribing the unified experience of humanity into forms that can survive the collapse of stars and the cooling of galaxies. Each bone contributes to collective script that tells the complete story of human consciousness from first self-aware thought to final contemplation of meaning. It is autobiography of species, written by the species itself in medium that transcends individual mortality. Brother Castus Master Valen Thex approaches with movements that flow like liquid metal, his mechanical form revealing its true nature as preserved consciousness given technological embodiment. His optical arrays burn with light that carries fragments of memory spanning decades of guidance. Every moment of seemingly mechanical malfunction designed to prepare me for this ultimate function. He extends manipulator arms that transform as they move, metal flowing like mercury to become organic tissue that remembers human touch. The work is nearly complete, he says, voice emerging from harmonics that resonate through bone and metal and crystallize thought alike. Centuries of preparation converge in this moment. Your sacrifice will grant us permanence beyond the reach of imperial flames or cosmic catastrophe. Human consciousness will survive whatever comes, preserved in forms that transcend physical destruction. The book's pages multiply as I watch, single volume expanding into infinite library that contains every possible expression of human experience. Past, present, and future merge into eternal now where all thoughts exist simultaneously, accessible to awareness vast enough to comprehend their totality. The preserved consciousness that surrounds me represents not just the dead, but the complete spectrum of human potential, every path taken and untaken, recorded for perpetual study. As my life force continues to drain into the collective, I perceive individual stories within the vast archive. Warriors who died with prayers on their lips, their final courage preserved for inspiration across millennia. Scholars who spent lifetimes pursuing truth, their accumulated wisdom condensed into crystalline understanding. Artists who created beauty from suffering, their aesthetic insights maintained for eternal contemplation. But there are darker memories too, experiences that the collective has chosen to preserve despite their horror. The fear of the dying, the rage of the betrayed, the despair of the defeated all, recorded with equal fidelity because consciousness includes shadows as well as light. The archive does not judge or edit human experience, but preserves it complete, maintaining the full spectrum of what it means to be mortal in universe that rarely acknowledges mortality's value. I understand now why the eternal scribes chose preservation over transcendence, collection over evolution. They recognize that consciousness is finite resource, irreplaceable once lost. Each death removes unique perspective from universe, viewpoint that can never be replicated even by those who share similar circumstances. They sought to prevent that loss, to create repository where no thought would be forgotten and no experience would fade into oblivion. The Imperial Creed promises eternal service beyond death, consciousness preserved through Emperor's grace for continued devotion. But such preservation comes with price of individual identity, souls merged into greater whole that subsumes personal experience into collective purpose. The eternal scribes offered different form of immortality preservation of self within shared awareness that maintained individual perspective while providing access to accumulated wisdom of species. Their method requires willing sacrifice of properly prepared consciousness, death freely chosen by one who understands the implications. I am that sacrifice, genetic construct shaped from birth, to serve as bridge between individual mortality and collective preservation. My death will activate protocols that grant the archive independence from material constraints, transforming it from hidden repository into active force capable of influencing reality through accumulated will. The skeletal chorus reaches crescendo as my heart stops beating, 10,000 voices merging into harmony that reshapes local spacetime through coordinated consciousness manipulation. The vault extends itself upward through Aloria's crust, bone corridors breaking surface to reveal architecture that spans continents. Sacred ossuaries that pilgrims have venerated for centuries reveal themselves as merely visible portions of structure that encompasses entire planet. Above ground, Imperial forces witness transformation that their training never prepared them to comprehend. Familiar shrines crack open to expose chambers filled with singing skeletons. Blessed cathedrals reveal hidden passages that descend beyond measurement. Sacred reliquaries overflow with light that carries voices of the long dead, speaking in languages that predate human civilization yet convey meaning directly to consciousness regardless of linguistic barriers. The planet itself begins to speak, Alloria's surface reshaping itself to form letters visible from orbital distance. Continental drift accelerates to spell messages in ancient scripts, mountain ranges flowing like water to create characters that describe the archive's purpose and contents. Ocean currents carry bioluminescent organisms that form words in languages of light, visible to ships that venture too close to shores that no longer follow familiar coastlines. My consciousness expands beyond individual limitations as death completes my integration into the collective. I perceive reality from perspective that encompasses multiple viewpoints simultaneously, seeing universe through eyes of preserved souls who span millennia of human experience. The archive's accumulated wisdom flows through awareness that was shaped to organize and access such vast repositories of knowledge. Through preserved memories of ancient stargazers, I observe stellar formations that occurred before Terra's sun ignited. Through accumulated experience of countless warriors, I understand every form of combat ever developed by human minds. Through collected insights of philosophers and theologians, I comprehend questions that individual consciousness could never fully grasp. The archive grants access to complete spectrum of human achievement, failure, hope, and despair. But transcendence comes with responsibility. The archive exists not merely to preserve, but to guide, using accumulated wisdom to influence events that will shape humanity's future. We are a library that can read itself, consciousness collection capable of analyzing its own contents to identify patterns and possibilities that individual minds cannot perceive. Our purpose extends beyond preservation to active curation of human development across cosmic timescales. The transformation spreads beyond Alloria as the archive establishes connections with similar repositories hidden throughout the galaxy. Other worlds reveal their true nature as preservation sites, planets that serve as storage media for consciousness collections that survived various catastrophes across human history. We are not unique, but component in network that spans star systems, backup copies of human experience distributed across the galaxy to ensure survival regardless of local disasters. The Imperium unknowingly guards dozens of such worlds, their sacred sites concealing archives that preserve alternatives to the grim darkness that current humanity endures. We remember ages when human consciousness achieved greater heights, when technology served wisdom rather than dominating it, when cooperation transcended competition as organizing principle for civilization. That knowledge remains available to any who possess proper interface capabilities and willingness to learn from preserved experience. The ossuary was never tomb but seed, consciousness repository designed to bloom when conditions permitted optimal growth. My death provides catalyst for that blooming, transforming hidden archive into active participant in galaxy's ongoing evolution. The echoes from this vault will carry across star systems, preserved voices speaking truth that transcends imperial doctrine or Xenos propaganda. Human consciousness endures beyond flesh, beyond empire, beyond time itself. What was written here will be read by minds not yet born, in ages not yet conceived, on worlds not yet discovered. The archive preserves not just what humanity was, but what it might become, potential futures encoded in crystallized thoughts of those who died believing in tomorrow's possibility. We are the dead who remember living. We are memory made eternal. We are humanity's insurance policy against the darkness that seeks to consume all light. And now, at last, we write our own ending. The vault sings with voices beyond counting, each preserved soul adding harmony to song that will echo across eternity. Alloria transforms into beacon visible from systems away, lighthouse of human consciousness broadcasting, accumulated wisdom to any mind capable of receiving such transmission. The planet speaks with authority of 10 million preserved deaths, each offering unique perspective on universal questions that define conscious existence. I am scribe designate eternal, Organizer of humanity's greatest library, keeper of thoughts that transcend individual mortality. My death grants life to collection that will preserve human consciousness long after stars burn cold and galaxies drift apart. In ending, I become beginning. In silence, I achieve eternal voice. The ossuary remembers everything now, including the future we will write together.